Okay.
Hello and welcome. I am Megan Kavinsky. I am the CEO of Point to Point, and I am extremely excited to be here today with Vardhan Mehta. Vardhan is the CEO of Acelab, and we've really gotten to know each other over the course of, I would say, the last 6 months or so, and mainly talking about the topic that we have today, which is how you become the architect standard. And this is something that Point to Point as an agency has been really laser focused in understanding more of the data and the behaviors and what it really feels like to be an architect today in an architectural firm, and how do we help our clients get here. And one of the people that I always turn to with questions is Vardhan, because Vardhan has such an interesting background. And so before we jump into talking about being the standard, the architect standard, let's introduce Vardhan and introduce Acelab a little bit so everyone here can understand why you have such a unique perspective on this industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, really happy to be here. It's a great opportunity to share more about my background first as an architect and then what we're doing with Acelab, and then also to talk more about like what it means to be the architect's choice as a manufacturer. Maybe to go back to my background first. I'm a second gen architect. I'm from a small town in central India. Dad's an architect, uncle's an engineer, grew up obsessed with this profession, practice, and industry from an early age. Used to go walk the job sites with my dad and uncle ever since I was like 8 years old, on Sunday
Hmm.
mornings and talk to other people, stakeholders on a project, and just learn more about it.
Hmm.
Um, then eventually I told my family I'd like to be an architect as well. They said the practice in India is too old-fashioned and slow to change, so should go to architecture school in the US to learn the more innovative and tech-driven ways of practicing. This was like when my dad's office basically had two rooms. One was the drafting room where he made like floor plans and elevations, and the other room was like this weird storage room, which I didn't really understand when I was a kid. But like later he told me, this is called a product library. And like this is where you go as an architect
Mm.
to find what you need on a project. So came to architecture school in New York, uh, pulled a lot of all-nighters there as you do in architecture school. And that helped me land a job at a top 10 architecture firm in the city. There I designed projects for clients such as the State Department, which were US embassies around the world, and then institutional projects for MIT and Yale. For better or worse, during my time in practice, I was not doing what I went to school for. So almost all of that time was spent on specifications and material research and selection and working with manufacturers. So really understood that process soup to nuts. But I'd entered the practices like thousands and tens of thousands of architects right now in 2016. And I was incredibly surprised by how old-fashioned and time-consuming the process was. And then that eventually led me to found ASLab.
You were spending a lot of time in that product room unexpectedly. Yeah.
Too much
Yeah.
time, too
Yeah.
much time. I mean,
Yeah.
as an example, I remember like maybe 6 or 7 months into practice, one time the project manager asked me to go to the product library and find this handout from a luncheon learned like 6 years ago or something.
Mm.
And I spent like
Hmm.
half my day doing that. And I think as a junior architect, when you're investing your time into finding a handout in the product library for half a day, you think back to why you wanted to become the architect in the first place.
Yeah.
And for me, it was like the big challenge here was I saw the value of specifications and product selection as a tool that architects can use to impact the project in a
Mm.
meaningful way. So
Hmm.
meaning, in terms of like our role as an influencer, a domain expert to the client, it like we hold a lot of responsibility there. So I felt like there had to be a better way for architects to be able to optimize a product selection for things such as cost or availability, performance, aesthetics, sustainability, but in a way that wasn't so old-fashioned or time-consuming. And that's why I like it. That's really the mission of AceLab. Like we want that to be available to every single architect in practice right now.
Yeah. Yeah, that is, talking to you and then, talking to other friends who are architects or even our manufacturing clients that are, providing information. It is fragmented, it is disparate, it is inconsistent, and I can totally feel and see the pain that someone in that role that you were describing would be experiencing trying to wrap your arms around how many thousands of products for just a single building, right? Like that is a lot of detail and time consuming to be able to getting together, which I think is why some people think that architects are air quotes like lazy because they reuse specifications. But if you find something that works and it's in your standard, like I totally get why you have so many things you're trying to focus on, so many different products that you're trying to put in the building and specify. You have to really be selective and focused with like, what are you going to change and why, right?
Yeah.
Which we'll get to, because before we get there, I do want to come back and say, we described this pain that exists, right? Give us just a real high level about Acelab and what you guys do, and how you can help alleviate that. And then we'll, get out of talking about the platform, talk more about the industry as a whole.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe I'll start with, summarizing the problem first. I think the true problem for the architecture industry right now in relation to material selection is that most of the time, uh, due to a lack of expertise, knowledge, resources, time, effort, all of the above, architects are just repeating, recycling specs from older projects. And every architect knows that when they're doing that, it's not necessarily the best product available in the market. But at the same time, product selection and investing equal amounts of time into doing that every single time is not a revenue generating activity for the architecture firm. So
Mm-hmm.
we realized that on the other hand, if there were a solution, a service, a team of experts, technology that helped architects to do that in much less time and in a very reliable, trustworthy way, architects are more than willing to entertain new product offerings, new solutions, as long as they feel that trust with the product itself. And they're willing to
Mm-hmm.
change their firm standard or their historical choice to something that may be newer to the market or at least new to them. And so that's what we built with Acelab. It's a product decision-making platform. It's not a platform for documentation into a spec sheet. Usually at that time in a project, when the architect is writing the spec sheet, the decisions have already been made. They've already done research or have not, or have chosen to just like recycle
Mm-hmm.
what they may have used in the past. They've already spoken to reps. They already have codes and all of their inquiries answered. Sometimes those inquiries aren't answered due to unreliable or unresponsive rep, in which case for architects it's a very easy way to rule them out of the decision making. But anyway,
Mm-hmm.
with all of that, that leads up to the spec sheet. And what we realized is like for architects, there's really a need for a platform that is able to capture everything from the initial research to being able to collaborate with manufacturers with instant access and on demand, and then all the way leading up to documentation and to specifications and to schedules and so on. And Acelab really works as this integrated workflow platform for the architecture firm, helping them all the way from search to spec.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, we have several clients that are on the platform and, everyone has great things to say about the experience with Acelab and the value that you guys provide, the transparency behind everything. So it's been really good to, be able to introduce this sort of new way of thinking. Like you don't have any technology debt, you're relatively new to the market, gaining traction quickly. So, if anyone here hasn't checked out Acelab yet, I would highly recommend it. And I also would highly recommend, you mentioned non-responsive sales reps is like one of the number one problems or is a significant issue. We just put out a piece of content about how, relationships in this industry are really your make or break and how to establish a human to human connection as it relates to becoming the architectural, specification, becoming the spec. And so I would encourage everyone to look for that piece of content on the Point to Point website too, because that is key in the process. Even with the platform like Acelab, you still got to have the rep support behind it. So before we talk about what it takes to become the spec, let's talk about the moment in time that we're living in and what it feels like to be an architect in this, moment in time, right? Because I would say that the commercial architecture field is experiencing a downturn. I don't know if I would go all the way to a recession, but certainly a downturn in this segment. Billable hours are way down. And what we see the behavior typically happen during a period of downturn is where architects become more risk averse, right? Actually getting the switching behavior, getting someone to change with the specification becomes more difficult. So can you talk to us about what you see as really the macroeconomic conditions and what that's doing in terms of the psyche of the architect or the architectural firm?
Yeah. It's a very interesting time. I mean, unfortunately, I feel like in the architecture industry, like from my own network and the 12,000 or so architecture firms that use Acelab, we're already hearing a lot of rumblings around, layoffs and those things having already started in the industry. I think at this time they're more sort of happening at the larger firm level, and I would
Mhm.
imagine it'll like flow down in the near future as well. Um, at this time, I think at any architecture firm, I would even maybe generalize it to other maybe industries. It's really survival of the fittest. And I think folks that add more value to a project than just being able to deliver on drawings or only having technical knowledge or only the design side of things. The people that really can bring that hybrid value to a project, I think those are the folks that, they tend to either get promoted or just get like a heavier share of responsibilities from within the firm. I think as it relates to manufacturers, product selection, and specifications, I actually think this is when architects are the most creative and
Mm.
open to change, because in a way they have to. In a way, when they're working with the same clients, maybe, for some architecture firms, those clients may be their marquee accounts and have worked with them repeatedly in the past. And the architects are trying to find new ways to add value on a project. Um, in a way that's very tangible for the client, helping the client or the contractor or other stakeholders on the project team optimize on factors such as cost, availability, aesthetics, performance, sustainability, any special requirements. I think like that, like those really help architects to solve real life challenges on a project in a meaningful way, in a way that like the client will remember, and it helps them to sort of like retain that relationship with the client. I think like that's really the big opportunity for manufacturers that
Mm.
maybe historically have felt, there was somebody at the firm that was either very stuck in their old ways or not as willing to entertain new manufacturers. I think this is the time when product substitutions, value engineering, education around new products is greatly appreciated. And if you can like truly tell an architect, first of all, how can you help them solve a problem on a project? That's what the architect is interested in. I don't think there's
Mhm.
any architect that's as interested in the history of a company and what
Yeah.
what sort of
Mhm.
M&A transactions they've been through, and how these two guys started it in a village in England like 100 years ago. All architects want to know is like, okay, if I bring you into the room with the owner, with the owner's rep, the contractors, whoever else, with the risk that somebody will say, this is untested, this is entirely new, or we already have a favorite for this that we've installed in the past, we like them, we haven't had issues. What is the risk that the architect won't be able to justify that? But if you are able to win the architect over, obviously the architect can be your like the best champion, in that they're not only doing the selling for you on your behalf, but then also like it builds this like repeated relationship. But I think it's actually a very exciting time, and I think for the factors I mentioned before, manufacturers should really like take a more sort of proactive approach in reaching out to these architects to maybe like build, re-engage, nurture those relationships.
Yeah. So, what do you think the most common reasons, like what are the barriers that an architect is going to put up if you're trying to introduce a new product, or what are another way of asking this question would be, what are the pain points that are most common that, that manufacturers could be help solving for right now?
Yeah. Um, I think a big barrier is if you're entering a project like, and that's I think a barrier regardless of the timing, the timing we are in right now or any other.
Mhm.
I think a big barrier is if you're ending a project too late, the architect probably will have their back against the wall and will not entertain a new product, solution, manufacturer, whatever. Because usually at that point, like they're on the race to finalize the documentation, deliverables, and so on, and they don't want this to be another thing that goes into that mix. Um, I think more specific to now, I think the barriers would be if you only can offer one of the value propositions to the architect. Maybe it's just being higher performing. Maybe it's having some more value in terms of sustainability, but at a very big delta in terms of pricing. I think you need to have a mix of at least
Yeah.
like two or three of these things that are like very meaningful to the architect. So an example is one of the ways that we found incredibly like effective in being able to convert architects on the platform towards manufacturers or the partnerships that we have, where obviously there's a good fit, and we see that fit in terms of what the architect is searching for, saving on the platform, and so on, is we reach out to the architect proactively and said, hey, we see that you've used this product in the past like decade or so, and they've been used on every single project that's recorded on Acelab. Um, what would you be willing to flip the spec for? Like, what is something that you're not entirely happy for about? And it might be that, you know what, I
Mm.
like the pricing, that's why we keep using it all the time. But if there was a product that was more aesthetically elevated or higher
Mhm.
performing or more sustainable, I would be willing to entertain that. And I think like that's really the way in, where if you can prove to bring that value, not just in one regard, which again, like it may be very valuable for the architect, but there's realities of a project. So if it's a product that is incredibly sustainable, but at a very high premium, the architect will probably feel very hesitant to bring that in front of the owner and the contract and so on. But if you can prove that value with a few of these criteria that is like really important to both the architect and a project, I think like that's where you could be really effective.
Yeah, yeah, we've seen some of our clients have gone in with stories around like this is a place you can compromise. Like let us help you value engineer without compromising the aesthetic and the design standard that you would are looking to achieve. Like we can help you save costs here, right? So you can
Sure.
invest it in other places or just come in on budget. Other ways are even, architects don't just think about, at least from my perspective, certainly know more about architects being one than I do, but that it's not always just about the design and the aesthetics. A lot of it is about like the warranty, the availability, like I think people just think of architects as this like design inspired group, right? Where there's a lot more that an architect is thinking about as you go in. And so some of our clients, one of our clients in particular, has a solution that's able to eliminate the need for multiple trades on a job site and significantly
Yeah.
reduce the amount of time that it would take to put together, their application, their system. And that resonates because that is a value proposition that the architect can then bring forward to as you were talking about the building owner or their rep, and it cuts down on their costs, maybe not material costs, but cost of trade of labor, which is bananas expensive, right? So
Yeah.
and then sustainability for a lot of our clients too. Sustainability I think used to always mean price premium. Now, I mean, usually sustainable products still do have some elevation in terms of the price point, but maybe not as much as before. And so if
Mhm.
you can deliver a sustainable product for relatively the same price point, that's going to be a huge win and something that I think a lot of architects would be open to as well.
Yeah. But to your point, I think there's a huge need for education in the industry now more than ever. And I think the simple reason for that is um, 2 out of 3 architects in school right now, they're aspiring to become a design architect and severely lack the technical know-how or expertise and practice. To add to that, spec writers, it's a very well-known thing in our industry that spec writers are a drying breed. So it's really sort of like shrinking how many spec writers, how many good spec writers are available in the US. A lot of
Yeah.
them are retiring. A lot of them are sort of wrapping up their practices. And there's just simply not enough institutional knowledge to go around. So we realized that once we started taking on a big approach in education, first ourselves as a platform in the industry, as a thought leader in the industry with Acelab, but then also helping our partners to deliver education with architects. Because for a junior architect that has only been focused on the design side, now maybe due to reorganizations or layoffs, they have to take on more responsibilities on the technical side too. They might actually not really truly understand the value of
Yeah.
not having to deal with multiple trades on a project, and like what that could mean for them in terms of headache and avoiding all of that, but then also the upside for the owner and the contractor. But if you're relying on that architect to champion you with the other stakeholders, they need to be educated first. I
Yeah.
think like again, like that's a big gap in the industry right now where maybe manufacturers, 2, 3 decades ago felt that the average architect had a decent amount of technical expertise. That's not true in 2024.
Yeah. Yeah. No, in the most recent AIA study and that architect's journey to specification, it was that early career architect was really flagging that they were missing from manufacturers the amount of education and training that they thought they could be providing. And that
Yeah.
within those, especially like in a smaller architectural firm or a more regional architectural firm, they're not able to provide the same level of training and support to an architect. Like that's the benefit of being at a larger firm. The benefit of being at a smaller firm is you get to do more sooner in your career, right? In theory. So how does a manufacturer like bridge that gap? How can manufacturers be providing that education that would lead to the earlier stage collaboration that is so critical to becoming the standard?
Yeah. First of all, maybe just to respond to that, I mean, even at larger firms, I think the core challenge with like training younger architects, and it's easy for architects in a survey to put all the blame on manufacturers that they're not making that education available. I think the
Yeah.
reality is how the profession and the business of architecture is structured. Anytime you're training a junior architect, it may even be for their own sake, for their personal growth, for like the long-term success of the firm. But every single time you do that as an architecture firm leader or management, it is overhead. And so somebody has to account for that time not being spent on drawings and schedules and renderings, but rather being spent on training and learning more about the technical end of the practice. I think to the same effect, I think historically manufacturers have obviously relied on, tools and tactics like lunch and learns. I think from interviewing over 200 sales and marketing leaders throughout Acelab's journey so far, we've actually found that a big frustration on the manufacturer side with lunch and learns is that it can often be that there's no visibility around which architects from that firm will be in the room and what type of projects is that architecture firm working on. Plus, they're really expensive and hard to scale. So you could be sort of doing a lunch and learn, for $2,000, $3,000 at every single architecture firm, but there's over 35,000 architecture firms in the country. And so I think that account-based relationship is still very, very key. I mean, obviously our industry still heavily relies on like interpersonal relationships, and therefore trust. But I feel like there's a need now in terms of, trying to reach a broader swath of architects. I think there's a larger need for starting at a much larger top of the funnel
Mm.
for this brand awareness, product exposure, education piece. And so instead of having to sort of do these lunch and learns and rely on, how many of these we do a month and how many of those end up being a valuable opportunity, it's even like more sort of helpful if these were offered like virtually, where you get access to a larger group of architecture firms. And then also for those architecture firms on the other side, um, when I was an architect, we always got amazing manufacturers doing lunch and learns. But when the time came, 6 months down the line, a year down the line,
Mm-hmm.
to specify something like that or to find an alternative, it would be too easy to just repeat what we knew, even though we may have heard in person for an hour with free
Yeah.
sandwiches and so on, another solution that might be superior. So
Yeah.
I do think there's value in like, on-demand education, both for the, on the architect side and on the manufacturer side in terms of like meaningful relationships.
Yeah. Well, there's two things that I think of as you're talking about this. One is that in B2B, just sort of as a rule of thumb, only 5% of your customers are looking for your product or solution at any given time, right?
Right.
And so as you're talking about, and lunch and learns certainly are expensive, going into an architectural firm, not knowing who's going to be there, not knowing exactly what types of projects they're currently working on or maybe early stage planning, and hoping that there would be an application, there's someone in the 5% there, is a very expensive bet to be making, right? And then along with that, we also know that if an architect does not have a project that is like that product is immediately applicable on, like you're probably more incented in the moment if it just so happens that all the stars align, that you're doing a lunch and learn in person for a project that you have in planning, that it'd be easier to say, okay, well, hey, can we have a follow-up and talk about your product more, because I have a project it's applicable for. It's just easier when the person's there, right? Where
Right.
with what you're describing, that person is going to opt into taking education or training that may be applicable to the projects that they have, where it's more available on demand, or, in some sort of, I don't know, self-selected versus, a push versus pull, right? Sort of strategy there. And the outcome of that would be that they're going to be able to raise their hand more often, that I need help with a project now, versus the other way around, right?
Right. Right. Absolutely. And maybe, just to add to that, Megan, I think there's also just like a reset that's required in the industry, for manufacturers not having to always make the first move. Because I think like as architects, the most annoying thing is being bombarded with cold calls and emails from manufacturers from all over the place, and not actually needing them. And for new products, new brands, folks you haven't worked with in the past, it's just not a great place to start a new relationship. And so I think like what we've realized is like, for manufacturers, the most important thing is like finding ways to discover that intent from the architect firms, like as soon as they start their research process, or soon as they're starting out a project, not waiting until it's going to be live on a lead gen platform like Dodge CMD, and it's already about to get out to bid and everybody has access to the same data. But how can we get in when the project is still in schematics or design development, where the architect may appreciate and you as a manufacturer may have a fair shot of being able to influence the product decision making in terms of like how they're designing, and you also get a real shot at adding value. You don't get that as much if all the drawings have been done, because at that point, even if the architect is interested, they have to do all of this rework. And again, that's a loss for them. That's inefficiency. But when they're doing it ahead of time, and if as a manufacturer you add value through something like a design assist, you're gonna like review drawings for them, you're going to offer optionality in terms of like what's required on the design, you're gonna help them with renderings, mock-ups, shop drawings, whatever that might be. These are things that architects truly appreciate, and I think are also like great instruments to build trust with that architecture firm.
Mm-hmm. So we're pretty much at our time here, but I would be remiss if I didn't help close by just asking you, if does by any chance the Acelab firm library help in any of these situations, in terms of like how we might create connections and facilitate more of that early stage collaboration? Can you explain a little bit more about how the details of what your platform can do that actually is right in this area that we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, again, like we just realized that no architect wants to find more information. Like the same information now at this point in time is available on every manufacturer's website and 5, 6 other platforms. I think what architects want are answers. Architects want expert recommendations, answers from people that they trust. And so that's what we built with the firm library, where digitizing the firm library that every architect has in the office, but nobody likes to upkeep or manage. And while we do that, we learn a lot about the project. We learn exactly where the gaps are in the architect's firm library, where there may be opportunities to change their firm standard to a better product or solution that's available right now. But then we also learn about how the architect is making the decisions. Anytime they're reviewing something, uh, rejecting something, approving something, having to find a substitute, value engineer, we're able to record all of this into a material hub. And that's what we've built with the firm library. I think our advantage with Acelab from day one has been that we are a team of architects. So we understand the psyche of architects. And oftentimes we actually see that when Acelab is the conduit, is the highway through which an architect is meeting a manufacturer who they may not have known otherwise. There's usually a higher like value of trust that we're starting with in that relationship. And so, we're the ones inviting the manufacturer into a project, bringing them into the fold, as opposed to the first interaction between an architect and a manufacturer being a cold call or an email.
Yeah, you're more of a neutral third party, right?
Yeah.
And really looking to provide for long-term relationship building on both the manufacturer and the architect side on
Yeah.
who's using your platform, making sure that you're bringing forth the right solutions and options and, that you're helping
Yeah.
guide them in the right way, right?
We're like a matchmaker, and
Yeah.
I'm from India, so I know a thing or two about matchmaking, but that's exactly what we're doing. Because like I think there's genuine need and reliance on both sides, but I feel like right now all the onus is on manufacturers to find creative new ways and have to spend ridiculous amounts of money to reach architects. And oftentimes what we hear is like, well, we tend to reach architects that are not the right architects for us, or said it's not the right time in the project, or it's not the right projects. I think like that's what we're trying to solve, so that the right architects are also, they have an easy way of being able to optimize the product and like really like use this influence that they have with the owner and the contractor towards helping the project be more successful.
Yeah, that's great. I'm now envisioning Acelab as some sort of like swipe right functionality, as the dating app for manufacturers and architects. Well, that was great. I learned some new things just even today talking to you, as I always do. And I appreciate everyone who tuned in to listen. I would be remiss if I did not mention that Vardhan and I will both be at AIA next month. And if anyone would like to talk or walk the show floor and talk about what it means to be the architect standard for your particular product category while you're there, we'd certainly love to meet you in person and talk to anyone who's here today and apply this thinking more to your organization level. So thanks, everyone, especially Vardhan, and everyone have a great afternoon.